We're going to get started with the closing plenary. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to introduce a very special speaker. This very special speaker is a lifelong Michigander focused on getting things done and making a real difference in people's lives. She was elected to the House of Representatives in 2000 and elected to the Michigan State Senate in 2006. In the 2018 gubernatorial elections, she won all 83 counties in the primary and won the general election with 53% of the vote. Since taking her oath in office, she has put together the most diverse cabinet in our state's history and has signed executive directives focused on increasing equity, including but not limited to executive directives to clean up our drinking water, end discrimination in state government based on sexual orientation and gender identity, secure equal pay for equal work, and expand opportunities for small and disadvantaged businesses. I promise you the list is a lot longer than this. Since day one, her administration has gone everywhere and worked to make Michigan the best state to live, work, and invest. Whether you're a family looking to start a life with more affordable health care and housing, a business looking to expand with a skilled workforce, or a young person seeking a path to a brighter future with more personal freedoms, this very special speaker, who you still have no clue who I'm talking about, because I haven't said her name yet, is focused on building a safer, more welcoming Michigan with a place for you in it. Okay, no more secrets. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to our very own Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. I can't come to Detroit without someone yelling out Big Gretch. I love it. Thank you. Mwah. All right, I am excited to be here at the Civil Rights Summit on Fair Housing. I want to thank everyone here for all the different hats that you wear in real life and on the job. I know that this work is done by people who never lose sight of what's really important, and I want to recognize the Michigan Department of Civil Rights for bringing us together and the ICON for hosting us here in Detroit. We come together today to unite around some real fundamental truths. Every family needs a safe, affordable place to call home. Every community must have clean air to breathe and safe water to drink. And every Michigander deserves a shot at a bright future. These goals are straightforward, and yet they take a lot of work. Now, as you may have heard, I know you know I'm doing something about fixing those damn roads, right? But that rallying cry is about a lot more than just transportation. It's about all of our infrastructure, our pipes, our schools, our high-speed internet, and of course, our housing. Housing is foundational to life itself. Without water, food, and shelter, we can't function, much less live up to our goals and our best selves. A safe place to call home improves your health and well-being. It bolsters education and educational outcomes and career opportunities. It keeps you connected to your community and invested in the future. Housing is also an inextricable connection to your finances. A home is often the cornerstone of generational wealth, and the longer you own, the more you're worth. For most of our nation's history, explicit open housing discrimination was perfectly legal. Families of color were redlined out of communities and systematically denied loans, unable to buy their piece of the American dream. Fair Housing Act of 1968 finally outlawed housing discrimination on the basis of race, sex, or ethnicity, and it was a huge step forward. But just because something's illegal doesn't mean it's gone completely. We've heard testimony about more subtle, modern housing discrimination over the last few months during fair housing hearings across the state. A young mom was told that a certain apartment wasn't the right fit for her and her 2 kids. Citizens who served their time were treated differently decades after re-entering society. Disabled Michiganders were told their legally guaranteed accommodations were going to be too burdensome. And appraisal values were found to go up when people hid pictures of their Black family. This kind of discrimination is not just morally repugnant, it's illegal. And we must remain vigilant to fight it everywhere that it rears its ugly head. Now, we have made a lot of progress, including last year's expansion of the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act to include protections against housing and employment discrimination for members of the LGBTQ+ community. But we still see the long shadow of housing discrimination. According to the most recent data we have, the national home ownership rate for white Americans is 73.8%. For Asian Americans, 63%. For Black and Hispanic Americans, below 50%. These rates correlate with the wealth gap. There was a game of Monopoly. If this was a game of Monopoly, families of color started playing several turns after white families bought up most of the board and couldn't even get money to get into the game. So while we know that many housing challenges are linked to generational, race-based discrimination, lack of affordable housing today impacts every Michigander, regardless of who they are. Michiganders of every race are having a harder and harder time buying their first home. Teachers in Traverse City drive 2 hours each way because they cannot afford to live in the county where they teach. Seniors on fixed incomes in Southeast Michigan are priced out of their buildings. Growing families in West Michigan save for years but can't find a home in their already stretched budget. And the data is clear. Housing is a serious statewide challenge. It's not unique to Michigan, but it is our responsibility to address it here in Michigan. Too many families spend more than half their monthly income on rent or mortgage. Their housing stock is old. Okay, this is written by the younger people on my staff when they say 50 years old. As a 52-year-old, I'm here to say not everything over 50 is decrepit, but when we're talking about housing stock, we need to have affordable, great places for people to live. That means having tools to address it. Every community is different. Every community has different needs and opportunities. In many, it is bringing old housing stock that's 50 or older back up to our current day standards, but also building new housing stock, working with communities. We know that the rent is too high. We don't have enough housing. As I said in my State of the State earlier this year, our response is build, baby, build. We're moving fast. We are headed in the right direction. Since I took office, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, or MSHDA, has invested double what they did into housing compared to just the last administration. This year, we're making the largest housing investment in Michigan history to build or rehab 10,000 homes. Next year, we're going to do it again. Now, MSHDA has several remarkable programs that reduce barriers to home ownership, and I want to highlight 2 of them. Key to Own helps families with rental vouchers transfer them into home ownership vouchers, giving them the foundation to buy a home. My Home Loan is a mortgage program for first-time buyers that also offers down payment assistance up to $10,000. We're all driving toward a shared housing goal. At the 2021 Mackinac Policy Conference, we set a goal of permitting, building, or rehabbing 75,000 units in 5 years. Our goal was to do it by September of 2026. But because of our hustle, we're going to reach that goal early, 75,000 by May of next year, more than a year ahead of schedule. And so that's why at this year's policy conference, Just a few weeks ago, we decided we were going to raise the bar. I was proud to announce that we are boosting our statewide housing target to 115,000 units by September of 2026. That's a 53% increase. Our goal is ambitious, it is achievable, and it is absolutely necessary. Michigan's housing supply is not where it needs to be for several reasons, including a decade-long slowdown in construction following the 2008 recession and a lack of state investment prior to the last few years. We've made it faster to build with bipartisan legislation that cuts red tape and simplifies brownfield redevelopment. We funded programs revitalizing downtowns and main streets. And by building more housing, we can expand supply and lower costs. We can make big cities and small towns alike better places to live, work, and invest, while attracting and retaining the talent we need to grow our economy and our population. At that same Mackinac Policy Conference a few weeks ago, I also highlighted resources that we have received from the Biden-Harris administration to lower the energy costs that come with owning a home. Thanks to Solar for All and the home energy rebate programs, we have $367 million headed our way to lower costs for more than 28,000 Michigan families. Solar for All will help 18,000 low-income families install solar on their houses or in their communities. And home energy rebates will cut the cost of new, energy-efficient furnaces and heat pumps, water heaters, or stoves for 10,000 working families. These upgrades are a big deal. We know that the top costs in any household is generally rent, mortgage, and utilities. So, lower-income households could see their bills drop by an average of 20%, live in nicer, more comfortable space. Just think about what that could mean. Families will save hundreds a year. They'll be warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. And they'll be better protected against extreme weather events caused by climate change. When people sell their home, it'll be worth more and be more attractive to buyers. So I really appreciate the work that you are doing every single day. I know that MSHDA doesn't solve this problem themselves. I know that it's not just the state doing this work. I am inspired by the creativity, the ingenuity, and the drive that the people in this room bring to this issue every single day. I'm proud of the progress that we have made and look forward to doing more good work together. I want to ensure that you know where there is a problem and a creative solution, we want to be your partner. I know that together we can build a Michigan where your life, health, and wealth are not determined by your zip code, but by your ambition, your ideas, and your talent. So I thank you for the incredible work that you are doing in this space. And I know that we continue to drive this work. We're going to make sure that more people in this state, ultimately all people in this state, have a real opportunity because they've got a great place to live, a great job, and a state that values, protects, and respects every person who calls it home. Thank you so much.
All right, she shook my hands twice, so not washing them for a minute. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce myself now. My name is Alfredo Hernandez Corson, and I serve as the DEI Director for the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. We are about to start our closing plenary. And basically this afternoon, our topic is best practices and innovative approaches to increasing equity in housing. We have heard a lot of discussion today about approaches to address fair housing discrimination, bias, and disparate outcomes. This session is going to wrap up the day with a deeper look at how we can find solutions. To that end, we assemble a panel with a wide number of perspectives. And I promise you the panel is more than our friend Casey. Before we start the panel discussion, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, who's also going to be in our panel discussion. Colette Massengale joined the National Association of Realtors advocacy team in September 2022 and currently serves as the Senior Policy Representative for Fair Housing. Prior to joining NAR, Colette was Director of Professional Development and Member Engagement at Maryland Realtors. In that role, she served as staff liaison to the DEI Advisory Group, the Leadership Academy Advisory Group, the Professional Standard Committee, and the Grievance Committee. She also spent over 10 years serving as senior attorney in the Legal Affairs Department at Maryland Realtors, where she enjoyed engaging with members on the legal hotline, training on the NAR Code of Ethics, and teaching legal courses. Colette is a native Washingtonian. She attended Oberlin College in Oberlin, Ohio, and received her Juris Doctorate degree from the Washington College of Law at American University. Please help me welcome Colette Massengale.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for that fantastic introduction. All right, so everybody can see the screen, so thank you for being here today. I really wanted to spend some time talking about the National Association of Realtors, fair housing initiatives, and our efforts to advance fair housing and housing opportunities, not just in Washington, D.C. on the federal level, but also around the country. So we have introduced our Fair Housing Initiative. It's called ACT, and it stands for Accountability, Culture Change, and Training. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the programs and projects and initiatives that we have under this program and what we're doing to advance fair housing and housing opportunities in and around Washington, D.C. and around the country. So our ACT initiative stands for, again, Accountability, Culture Change, and Training, and there are various objectives that we have under this initiative. For example, we want to ensure that state licensing laws include effective fair housing education that holds real estate licensees accountable. We are concentrated on launching ads, letting consumers know that we are committed to fair housing, and that explains what consumers can do if they run into a problem or they experience discrimination. We are integrating substantive fair housing programs into all of our events and conferences. We've created a self-testing program. We have also launched some very robust fair housing education, and we are doing our best to spotlight real estate licensees, realtors who are advancing fair housing and homeownership opportunities in their communities. So under our ACT initiative, we have a couple of different projects, and I'm just going to kind of describe them under the different pillars. So one of our pillars is the accountability pillar, where we have created a self-testing program. We have partnered with a national organization to do the self-testing, and brokers can participate in the program. And so what we do is we have the organization do the testing, and then we come together and we do a training based on the results of that testing. In that training, we talk about the importance of testing. We talk about the history of housing discrimination, and then we use the results of the test to turn them into case studies and analyze them, talk about what went right, what didn't go right, and then towards the end of the training, we emphasize best practices around fair housing. So that's our self-testing program. And excuse me, one of the unique things about our self-testing program is that we're testing not only rental transactions, but also sales transactions. So that's our self-testing program. We've also launched a licensing law research program. What we did there is we went around the country to look at what the fair housing education requirements look like for real estate licensees around the country. And what we uncovered was that there are quite a few states that don't require any fair housing training at all. And that is true for both pre-licensing, so to get into the real estate profession, as well as once you get your license and are trying to maintain your license, there is, in some states, no fair housing education at all. So we advanced policy, which was adopted by our board of directors, urging our state and local associations. We have about 1,100 associations around the country, so urging them to adopt or modify, introduce into the regulations and legislation a requirement to have robust fair housing education, not just for pre-licensing, but also for continuing education for all real estate licensees. We've also introduced policy that was adopted by our board of directors requiring all 1.5 million of our realtor members to take at least 2 hours of fair housing training. In addition to, under our ACT initiative, we have a program what we call the Fair Housing Champions Program. This year, we celebrated 3 champions, Eva B. Lee, Shadrack Bogany, and Paul Yorkis. Eva B. Lee has spent majority of her career advancing affordable housing initiatives in Chicago. Shadrack Bogany out of Houston has spent a majority of his career advancing or talking about the importance or educating people of color about the importance of homeownership and the value of homeownership. And Paul Yorkis was instrumental in Massachusetts in getting real estate forms translated into different languages. So we have this Fair Housing Champions program, and our goal is to inspire our 1.5 members to come up with their own ideas of what they can do to advance fair housing and homeownership opportunities in their own communities. Another piece of the pillar, another piece of the puzzle, is our training component, which obviously is really critical because we know how important it is for real estate licensees to be educated about not just the laws, fair housing laws, but the history, and be able to connect the dots between these past practices and policies that have since been outlawed, but understand that they are still impacting us today. So one of the trainings that we launched in the last couple of years is a training that we call the bias override training. And I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the concepts that we discussed there because I think it's a game changer. It's a course that I've taught a number of times myself and always walk away feeling inspired and hopeful about our industry and the direction that we're headed. So this is this training is called Bias Override. And we partnered with an organization out of New York called the Perception Institute. They are experts on the mind science of bias. They have the research, they've done the research, and they've trained judges and lawyers and doctors and nurses on how bias can infect an interaction with a patient or a consumer or a client. So this Bias Override course is a certificate course, and states around the country have been able to get fair housing education CE credit for the course. But it teaches realtors how their biases can in fact infect the transaction and could possibly lead to a fair housing violation. So we talk about the mind science of bias. So again, I'm just going to talk about, we'll go back just a minute, talk about the history and just some of the concepts so you get a taste of what we discuss in that course. But one of the key things is we want our members to walk away with tools that they can use to override their biases. So just a little bit about some of the concepts that we discuss. We begin with sort of the basic definition of implicit bias, which is our brain's automatic instant association of stereotypes or attitudes towards particular groups. And this last piece is really important, often without our conscious awareness. So a lot of the time, we're not even aware that we are acting on our biases. So we talk about the definition, we talk about the difference between unconscious bias and conscious bias, and how the brain is intaking or can intake 11 million bits of information at a time, but is really only processing 40 bits of that information consciously. And so when we don't have enough information, we can sometimes rely on stereotypes and information that is not accurate. So we talk about the difference between unconscious bias, conscious bias. We also talk about a concept known as the fairness paradox, which says that we hold these values of justice and equity but sometimes our behavior, our actions don't always reflect our ideals. And how do we deal with or overcome this paradox? And then we go into why it's so important that we understand how bias works and how understand the mind science of bias. We talk about the fact that we all have biases, or not blind to concepts like race or any of the other immutable characteristics that we have. We know that bias can manifest itself in our interactions with our clients, in the workplace, and with our colleagues. And we also talk about how the ways that biases can be increased. Inconsistency is a key. We talk about a bias being increased by stress, lack of clear criteria, not having checklists. We also know that it is also increased by, or it won't go away by just having good intentions. So we really actually need tools to help us override our bias. We also focus again on the history, which is really, really critical. We focus again on the context. It's important, of course, to understand what the laws are, but it's also important to understand the context of what was happening at the time and why these laws were in place. So we talk about racial zoning and provide specific examples of how this played out around the country. We talk about racial covenants. This is an example of one out of Seattle, and really put in there the language so people can really see this is what was said. This is an actual advertisement. This is what was out there in the public. We also talk about the connection that was made without evidence between race and property values, giving a specific example of the Federal Housing Administration's underwriting manual. And we take the time to go through that language in there that specifically talks about how when you bring things like race into a community, this is what the manual says, that it lowers property values, again, with no evidence to make that case. So we talk about the history. So that was just giving you an idea of that particular training. So what are we doing on the national, state, and local level? We know that progress lies not in enhancing what is, but in advancing towards what will be. So our Fair Housing Policy Committee has introduced several proposals in support of housing opportunity and fair housing, including in support of fair lending, special purpose credit programs, down payment assistance, consumer protection or diversity in appraisals and consumer protection in appraisals, ensuring things like a uniform process for reconsideration of value. We're urging our state associations to support legislation that it advances or that modifies heirs property or supports heirs property reform. And more recently, we put forth the proposal requiring that all 1.5 million of our members must take a fair housing education, at least 2 hours of fair housing education to maintain their membership. In addition, our advocacy efforts include increased funding for fair housing enforcement. We support the Equality Act, providing more explicit protections for LGBT+ communities. We are in support of language resources for mortgage lenders to support consumers who don't speak English as their first language. And we got together, mobilized our multicultural partners in support of the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. What we're doing on the state and local level, we have introduced a fair housing grant that state and local associations, we have about 1,100 state and local associations around the country, so they can use these grants to advance fair housing and homeownership opportunities in their communities. I'll just give you an example of what some of the states and locals are doing. In Maryland, for example, they used a fair housing grant to host a fair housing summit. During that summit, they launched a new fair housing course that incorporated that important history so people have context. They also partnered with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. They came in and talked about different trends and best practices. Minneapolis realtors used a grant to establish a program that helps homeowners identify deeds, deeds or discriminatory language in deeds and get that language struck at no cost to the consumer. GCAR is a local association in the DC area that used a grant to establish or continue the conversation around race and discrimination in housing. And so we are offering tools and resources for our states and locals across the country so that they can effectively advance fair housing and homeownership in their communities. And so we are proud of the work that we're doing, strengthening our relationships with our partners, our Black real estate professional organizations, our Hispanic real estate professional organizations, our Asian real estate professional associations, and our LGBTQ+ real estate professional associations. We know that homeownership is related to, or the benefits of homeownership include the opportunity for folks to build wealth. There's better educational performance often, higher participation in civic and volunteer activities, and better health outcomes, to name a few. So we know that the value and importance of building on a fair housing community, on a fair housing foundation. And so with that, I will end my presentation. The time is always right to do what is right, and I thank you for the opportunity to present before you today.
Thank you very much, Colette, for those best practices. I'm sure that here in Michigan we could benefit from many of them as we continue to learn from this panel discussion. So I hope you didn't get too comfortable because we'll need you back up here, as well as all the panelists. If you could please come up this way so we could get started with the panel discussion. Okay, thank you everyone. Before we get started, I would like to add a few ground rules. This workshop is about fair housing, not just housing. We're focused on bias, discrimination, disparate impact in buying and renting a home or related to credit ratings or mortgages. We would like to ensure we end this session with 2 or 3 specific policy recommendations for moving fair housing forward. We welcome comments with potential solutions for the issues being discussed. Please keep discussions focused on the topic of the discussion. For example, we're unable to address individual complaints or circumstances in this session. We are focused on broad policy discussion. We will not tolerate inappropriate, inflammatory, or disrespectful behavior or language. You will be warned once and then asked to leave. Let me introduce our panel. We have Colette Massengale. We just had the pleasure to meet her. We also have Annika Goss, CEO of Detroit Future City. We have Kiara Torrance, Housing Choice Voucher, Field Manager, Michigan State Housing Development Authority. That's what the acronym means. Yes. And Casey Peller, Policy Manager from Detroit Disability Power. The full bio of our panelists can be found by downloading the WUHA app or by using the QR code at the registration tables to find the agenda online. We are scheduled to take questions from the audience at 3:50, and we will be wrapping things up around 4:05. All right. I'd like to ask the panelists to please state your name when you speak. For example, when I speak, I should be saying, "This is Alfredo speaking." This is mainly to help the interpreters communicate their message more effectively. So Colette, you talked extensively about different strategies that are happening at the national level. I'm curious if you could expand a little bit more on what role do real estate agents play in ensuring fair housing?
So my name is Colette Massengale. So my thought is that realtors are really the boots on the ground and can be trusted resources can be a trusted resource in terms of educating clients about fair housing laws and including where a client can turn if they experience discrimination. We know that to be a trusted resource, realtors must know fair housing law, they must know the history, They must know the classifications, the protected classifications on the local, state, and national level. And they must take the opportunity at the outset of the relationship, maybe, for example, during a listing presentation or a buyer presentation, to explain the fair housing laws to buyers and sellers and owners and tenants, making sure that they document that conversation that they had and providing resources, fair housing resources that I know that our local, state, and national association has prepared that they can use as they have that conversation. We also have a code of ethics, and that has a fair housing provision. And if a realtor violates that fair housing provision, they ought to be able to let the consumer know that in addition to the options that they have, they can file a complaint with the state or local association. We also think it's really important that our realtor members know, are familiar with the fair housing enforcement agencies in their communities and neighborhoods, so that if there is an issue, that they know exactly where they can direct that consumer to go. So I think it's a matter of being educated about the laws and staying up to date on changes that occur, advances that are made, changes to the legislation, and then being able to share those resources and educate clients so that they know exactly what to do if an issue arises.
Thank you. And along those lines, I'm curious if anyone here on the panel would like to expand a little bit on what forms of lending discrimination have we encountered in the field, and how would we uncover and address lending discrimination in housing?
I can respond to that. Hi, everyone. I'm Anika Goss, the president and CEO of Detroit Future City. And, we at Detroit Future City, we focused on what we think of as inequities in lending, which may or may not be specific intentional discrimination. But we know that the denial rates, for example, here in Southeast Michigan are twice the rate for black borrowers as they are for white borrowers. In addition to that, we are also seeing that the other things that go into the underwriting that actually ends up leading to these inequities in lending discrimination, things like valuation based on the neighborhood you live in, is disproportionately ends up actually supporting black borrowers, where black borrowers that are trying to get a loan in other neighborhoods in Detroit are unable to do so because of other things, like the neighborhood isn't meeting the value, their house isn't appraising the way it should be. They're disproportionately targeted for lack of credit and lack of, or a disproportionate debt-to-income ratio. And so all of these cumulative effects that disproportionately affect black and brown borrowers in Southeast Michigan can then end up leading to these disparate lending practices. And that's something that we've noted.
Thank you so much. I think that actually the notion that denial rate is higher for people of color is something that makes me think about intersectionality, and perhaps I go to Casey to expand on this a little bit, but thinking about what forms of disability-based discrimination or accommodations issues have we encountered, and what recommendations or solutions would you propose?
Yeah, thank you. This is Casey. I would just like to back up a little bit and give some context around thinking about disability in housing before we jump into thinking about barriers to that. I think oftentimes in our culture, when we think about disabled people, we have a visual image that kind of pops up in our head that's usually a wheelchair user or someone with a mobility disability. And thinking about, housing access needs, that's usually the first thing that comes to mind is can you enter and exit and navigate through a space with a wheelchair, which is completely valid, is also one of the huge barriers that people with disabilities experience in not getting their housing access needs met. But when we think about the broad diversity of disabilities that there are in the disability community, and thinking about the around 2 million people here in Michigan who are disabled. That number is likely an undercount due to the way that we collect data. But thinking about how many people this affects, and beyond that 2 million individuals who have a disability themselves, right, it affects more than just a single person. We tend to live with our families, right, and we have our friends and coworkers over. I just invite you all to think about the spaces that you've lived in throughout your life, maybe the place that you're at now, your childhood home you grew up in. Would a wheelchair user or someone who has difficulty walking have been able to come visit you for dinner and use the bathroom, get in and out of the house safely and comfortably, right? Just to share a little bit of personal experience, I grew up raised by my aunt and uncle, and my cousin was in a wheelchair, and for years, it took all three of us to get him as a 120-pound kid in a 40 to 60-pound wheelchair up 5 steps through 2 doors and around a 90-degree corner to get in and out of our house, right? That's to take a walk, that's to go to doctor's appointments, that's to get groceries, and these are just like the huge impacts of not having accessible housing that families and individuals navigate daily without really thinking about it from the standpoint of like the house is the barrier, right? It's not the disability. We just don't build our homes and units in a way that meets the needs of our bodies. So when we think about the common barriers that we see, of course it's entry and exit. It's widened hallways and doorways. It's having cut under sinks and removable cabinets in bathrooms to be able to access sinks. It's roll-in showers. But some of the things that we maybe don't think about as much or hear about as much have to do with, getting service animals in your apartment. We know if we have pets and have lived in apartment complexes before, it is a navigation of all these sets of rules around the type of breed, the weight, the species of the animal, right? And those are typical barriers for people with service animals who need that access to housing, as we all do, and see barriers with landlords and property managers around that. Another huge one that we hear about is around visual alert systems and doorbells, right? We think about ding dong ditching, right? That's if you're picking up auditory information. But for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, you really need a visual alert to know, oh, I have a package arriving, or I have a visitor who's come to see me and I need to let them into the building. Getting into something a little bit more serious than that, right? Thinking about emergency alarms, something like a fire alarm. You need something that, especially in older buildings, in addition to the auditory information, you need a flashing light on that. And in a lot of cases, you can request a bed shaker, right? So if you're asleep and you're not picking up that visual information or hearing the auditory information, you can actually get woken up by this technology that's picking up, the smoke alarm and know that you need to exit the building safely. So those are just a couple of examples of common barriers that we see, especially in apartment complexes. One that's a little bit more difficult to put your finger on, but that we hear a lot about is source of income discrimination. People with disabilities are oftentimes supported by Social Security income, Social Security disability, for one reason or another have a part-time job or a low-wage job because there's so many barriers to education and to employment, right? And so all of these things add up to create this nexus of like barriers and things and hoops to jump through, things like that, that people with disabilities really have to combat on an individual level. So thinking about the laws that we have in place, right, to protect people with disabilities from that discrimination are written, but when we know that 3 in 5 fair housing complaints are related to having a disability, we know that the law in writing is not enough to actually protect people from this discrimination. And so having systems in place that are kind of standardized and centralized to be able to monitor and make sure that landlords and property managers not only have the information that they need, but can orient residents to it as well, and that they are actually monitored so you can see, when the request was made, what it was, how that request was responded to, and what the end result was, so that when there's non-compliance, it's not all on an individual resident to not only find their housing, navigate their housing needs, but then to also make complaints when those needs are not met, and then follow through that bureaucratic process on their own. So there's a lot of different solutions that we can take there, but the important thing that I just want to drive home is that this is something that doesn't just affect certain people, right? If we get to live in a body and in a mind long enough, disability is just a natural part of our living experience, and we want to make sure that all of us, all of our families and friends at any point in time have access to safe and comfortable housing to live in.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you for highlighting some of the problems, and also for providing us with some potential solutions as we think about so many issues related to discrimination and folks with disability. I'd like to move to a question for Mishda. How does Mishda encourage landlord participation in the Housing Choice Voucher Program? And I'm going to include it with this other one as well. What sort of policies and program changes have Mishda HCV program made to further expand diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Okay, this is Kira speaking. So just we've done more work, I would say, in the last few years, as we are seeing that the market is changing, right? The landlords are beginning to have more options as far as renters. And so we want to try to help our participants be as marketable as possible. Some of the programs that we have implemented is a lease-up bonus, which basically allow landlords that are new, take on new tenants that are Housing Choice Voucher participants to receive an incentive for leasing up with those tenants. We also offered that bonus to landlords that were willing to do renewals, because we started seeing a decrease in landlords that would like to do renewals. We've also implemented some landlord outreach events. One of the events we had, I want to say, had well over 1,000 landlords. It gave us an opportunity to dispel a lot of the myths associated with the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Just to give you a couple, for example, many landlords, of course not our landlords, right? But no, a lot of landlords came to us and just had a lot of concerns. They stated that they had issues navigating the system, or they stated that they had concerns about our participants damaging their units. So we were able to bring some data to this event and able to speak with them about how we conduct inspections, how some of our tenants have maintained their housing, how we don't have as many issues with a lot of our tenants when it comes to damages and things like that. However, as a result of that event, we also implemented the landlord damage claim request. So what we do now is that we have a process. So if there's a tenant and the landlord feels as if there's been damages to their unit that exceed normal wear and tear, then that landlord, once that tenant moves from that home, can request from MSHDA to receive funds to help assist them with repairs. Our hope was that it would lessen our landlords from pretty much coming after the tenants, trying to take them to court to obtain some of those fees, and also encourage landlords to know that they had this extra safety net so that they would be more willing to lease to participants. I don't want to miss anything. Some of the other concerns were about the landlords. They felt like we weren't very transparent, or they couldn't get the information they needed very quickly in regards to payments, details about participant payment amounts changing, things like that. So we've done a lot of updates to our systems and our record keeping that we initially had. Most of our programs our information is now online so that that landlord can see instant information. And we're actually under review right now to continue to improve that, that website that we have, which is our landlord portal, so that it'll allow the landlord to have real-time information of when exactly an inspection was completed, what deficiencies need to be corrected. They can have communication with the agency directly as well as our housing agents if they have concerns beyond the housing agent. So it'll just give us some real time. We can go back and forth communicating opposed to waiting on mail, which we're known for mail, and then sometimes it moves a lot slower. It's delaying our participants from being able to lease up in those units. So those are just a few of the processes. We're also still reviewing processes as far as streamlining many of the things that we have in place. We're looking at inspections, for example. One of the concerns of the landlords was how long an inspection take. So we're starting to implement a timeline, decreasing our deadlines for turnover. When someone moves out, when we receive that RAFTA back, which is the form stating that this participant can move into this unit, we have a timeline, a deadline for the housing agent to go out and complete that inspection. HUD also has passed down a new universal inspection for all PHAs, which is Inspire. So we're moving to that as well to make sure that our inspections are more consistent with what other PHAs are doing across the nation. The other part of your question, I believe, was about policies that we're implementing. Okay, so some of the policies are regarding lessening the policies or like streamlining our eligibility process. So one of the things we hear a lot, Mishta, I don't know if I believe I should mention this. Mishta's been coming more involved with doing events such as this, listening. So I've been to a couple of classes. I can hear some of the concerns that you guys are stating. And I can assure you changes are coming. And it goes hand in hand with our eligibility determination process, allowing alternatives to required documents. We all hear about birth certificates, social security cards being very hard to obtain for some individuals. So we're starting to look at possibly allowing self-certification of some of this information, as well as allowing alternate documents that are not just the birth certificate or the social security card. Just trying to be as flexible as possible and trying to allow the minimal requirement that's placed on us by the federal government. We're trying to see just where we can change these policies, where we can try to streamline things, make it a lot more easier for participants to receive the assistance that they need. Some other program and policies that we've changed. We currently have a pilot for a mobility program, and what that program does is it allows our families with children, participant families with children, to participate in a program that allows case management as well as financial assistance for pre and post moving to areas of opportunity. So these are usually our counties where we see a significant increase in rent. So we allow them to receive not just case management with finding a home there, but also being able to afford the home. So we are assisting them with more, they receive an increased subsidy so that they can live in these areas that have maybe like a better school system or other resources within those counties. Another is we also reviewed our screening process as far as eligibility. We're trying to, again, just get closer to what the minimal is allowed for the federal government, especially when it comes to the criminal screening process. I want to say that decreased significantly from where we were years ago. And the hope is that we can continue to move in this direction with many of the different policy changes that we are currently seeing. So I think I pretty much tried to answer your question.
Thank you, Kiara. Thank you. We would like to give a moment to the audience for any questions that you folks have. I think it's important that we recognize that there is resistance to DEI work as well in fair housing. It's not, it's one of the areas where we find resistance to DEI work, and that we need to think and understand how we push back to the notions that fair housing programs are discriminatory. So with that said, all the folks are here. They stay here because you were coming. They didn't even know the governor was coming. So they're here for you. So if you have any questions for the panel, please let us know.
Hi, my name is Renee. I work for Center for Independent Living in Southeast Michigan. My question is mainly for Casey, but also for Mishta. How do we increase access for to disabled people for housing choice vouchers? They're really hard to obtain unless one is literally homeless, and our system is constructed in such a way that for a person to get an HCV, they have to be considered homeless by HUD definition, and that is further harming people. So unless the list is open in a particular county, which in some counties happens like once every 10 years, we just have a huge crisis in folks who can't afford housing and need these vouchers and can't have years-long wait lists for them. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on how to solve that issue.
So that's a really good question. Okay, so I'll go first. I'm sorry, this is Kiera. So that's a really good question. And honestly, we don't have a one decision solution to that, right? So we know that the waiting list, they're extended. It takes some time to get your name put on those. Our waiting list also, we have a preference for homelessness as well as, which most of our homeless applicants have a disabled status as well, which provides them preference to the waiting list, which makes it even more longer. So what we're starting to look at is other housing opportunities. How can we find other programs, for example, our light tech properties, building more developments that then have preferences also maybe for a senior population or a disabled population. We're trying to see how can we create new housing possibilities, maybe building, if we have to get into relationships with developers that create buildings or apartments for these types of housing options. We're just trying to look outside of the housing choice voucher program whenever possible, because we do understand the limitations with the HCV program. So I would say that's where we're kind of trying to tackle that and come to some resolution. We're really taking a lot of input from a lot of our partners, and it's a learning curve, and we as well have to like build those relationships to get those developers that are willing to take on these types of projects.
This is Casey. I really, really appreciate this question, and I second everything that was just said. We know that there's about 18 million people with disabilities across the country who do qualify for those vouchers who are on waiting lists. And that's a very long list just of disabled people alone. So I would second, third, fourth, we need to look for other solutions. We need more funding in the voucher system, of course, but building more units that are charging 30% area median income and less is another huge option, right? Working with developers and increasing the incentives and requirements in our LIHTC dollars and our qualified allocation plan at the state level to make sure that we have more affordable units to begin with, coupling that with more rental assistance funds.
Hi, Jake Kilgo here. This question is for NAR. I'm a realtor and I'm a realtist, and I'm not going to have you go into buyer representation, which we know might become a problem, might make housing more expensive for people if they have to pay for their own representation, but there is still steering happening, and not all realtors do their due diligence or are as passionate about equal and fair housing. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about how NAR is combating either, offers come in, we know that conventional versus an FHA, or how maybe off-market properties aren't advertised to everyone, but how listing agents are being held accountable by NAR to make sure that they're representing a property equitably and fairly across the board.
Yes, steering is absolutely still happening. I think one of the things that we are really, really pushing is, for example, under our training pillar, making sure that our members are educated about steering and how it impacts folks. We've used, I'm sure you probably heard of the Long Island Divided. Sorry about that. Long Island Divided investigation. So where it uncovered widespread steering, specifically in Long Island, New York, back in 2019. So we used that 3-year investigation and all the data that came out of that as a way to educate our members about where that can lead. And I think a huge piece of that is the bias piece, which is why we're committed to ensuring that as many members as possible are taking the bias override course. Because in some instances, yes, the steering is absolutely, I think, intentional, but in other instances, it may not be. And so I think making sure that our members are aware of how bias plays out in a housing transaction, I think, is really critical. And we also, in terms of, I know you mentioned the settlement a little bit, we have several pieces of that. We're kind of trying to work the angle of addressing sort of the issues around the settlement and buyer representation and all of that. We have, for example, a discussion group that we have convened within our Fair Housing Policy Committee where we are focused on the impact of the settlement on buyer representation, specifically on our members of color who work primarily with first-time buyers and buyers of color. And we've brought in some two of our fair housing experts to really try to drill down and see how we can support our buyers, first-time buyers, buyers of color, and also our members who are working diligently with these consumers. So we are, the fight continues, but we are committed to coming up with as many sort of approaches as we can to ensuring that our members are aware of the impact of steering. And also, one of the pieces of the puzzle from that Long Island Divided investigation was the evidence of denial of equal professional services. That was another issue. So we are, those two issues, steering and denial of equal professional services, are paramount to, are the paramount issues that priority issues that we are addressing within our membership. And so all the things, the self-testing, the training is really critical. And then also, I think the piece that I shared about our champions, just having the realtors see other realtor colleagues who get this issue, understand it, and are taking action. So really trying to address it, and thank you for the question.
Thank you, Colette. Alfredo speaking. I'm sorry, do you want to add?
I just wanted to
Oh, please
add
go
to
ahead. Yes.
That I thought that was a great question also, and the appraisal system is also attached to that, with 1% of appraisers being people of color. 1% in the United States of appraisers are non-white appraisers. That contributes to the same level of discriminatory practice and bias in the system.
Thank you. We are running low in time. We have one more question. I'd like to ask the panel that they answer the very complex question that we're about to hear in about a minute or so. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for the information from the panel. This is for Kiera. I know you stated that you did an outreach program regarding landlords. I know I had looked into vouchers before regarding, turning my units into that, but it seemed kind of problematic. It didn't seem easy to transition. So my question is are you going to have more outreach programs for landlords, or when we do look online and we have questions, is it someone that we can talk to try to work this out, to see if it would benefit us as landlords to change our units into a voucher unit?
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. This is Kira speaking. Yes, so you brought up two very, very good things. So, yes, we are in the works with planning regionalized landlord outreach events because every county, we're seeing different issues in each county. So, opposed to the previous events that we did, which were much more broad, we wanted to tailor the discussion to what that community were seeing. So you can expect to see those dates come in fairly soon. And the other question that you asked was about us having someone that's more readily available to respond to landlord questions. Yes, we have been having talks about possibly implementing a landlord coordinator and having someone like that's more they're directly involved with that landlord aspect of the program as far as coming into the program as a new landlord, as well as issues that may arise so that we can retain the landlords that are currently participating with our program. This is kind of tied in, and I know you didn't ask about this, but just so everyone knows, it's tied in also, we're doing the outreach not just with our landlords, but our residents. We're also expanding our resident advisory board because we're coming up with ideas, we're coming up with plans and processes that we think is going to work, that we think would be the best case scenario for some of these situations. But this board is going to be our real live experience participants that's going to help us. And they actually brought forth the idea of having a landlord coordinator to help them even communicate with the landlords and getting information out to them. So that's something also that we're hoping to expand because we've seen really good participation so far with that.
Thank you very much. Please help me thank our panel with a round of applause. We would like to also thank each and every one of you for staying here until the very end. We really appreciate it. I mentioned earlier that we wanted to end the session with 2 to 3 policy recommendations for the Michigan Civil Rights Commission and the department, as well as partners in the field. So we have staff here taking notes, and we will capture any practical solutions that were discussed. This ends the last session of the 2024 Civil Rights Summit. I hope everyone had a great time. I will now bring up MDCR Director of Special Projects, Harold Kaur. Please give this guy a round of applause. He sees this summit in a soup, morning, breakfast, lunch. He's done it all. So Harold, where are you? There he is.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as mentioned, my name's Harold Kaur. I'm a Director of Special Projects for the department. In that role, I did have the distinction of leading a group of MDCR staff and putting on this event today. I did want to recognize 2 people that are part of a core group that has been working. We were literally meeting every single morning to prepare, to plan for both the 4 hearings that we had over the last few months and then the Civil Rights Summit. They may not want to be introduced, but they will be. Patricia Barrera, I see you. Please step forward. Thank you. And Liliana Stoneback, please. Okay, I'd also like to thank the entire staff of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. We had a number, well, I say volunteers, but they're all people that were doing work in addition to their daily jobs. I was actually sort of like the core that was focused on this summit. Everyone else that helped out was doing so after they finished their actual chores or duties or whatever you want to call it. So I do thank all of them. I do want to thank our AV vendor, Good Boy Multimedia up there, Christina's Catering, and the staff at the Icon for dealing with our many requests as we tried to make this a great event. I want to steal the director's thunder. I'm sure he's going to give some thanks as well. But what I'm really here to talk about is some of the policy recommendations and what happens next. So as was mentioned in several of the workshops, we did have people taking notes, try to get a sense for what some of those policy recommendations could do or could be. Overwhelmingly, both from the summit today and then also from the hearings, we heard a lot about information and education campaigns aimed at renters, home buyers, property managers, property owners, appraisers. So we heard a lot about, I think pretty much every session mentioned something about some kind of marketing or education campaign to get that information out there. So I think that'll probably be one of the major movements that we have moving forward. And there were also some things about informing, well, this is education as well, but informing developers and group home operators about discrimination in zoning, better resources for determining accessible housing, and some training, again, training programs for property managers and owners in general. So obviously, this is not a complete list of all the recommendations that were discussed. What happens next is we will be issuing a summit summary that will go into basically laying out those recommendations that we have and the path forward, what we plan to do from this point on to try to make those recommendations a reality. I am asking everyone in here, well, your email addresses, if you provided your email addresses, we'll be using those to distribute that summary via our newsletter. So if you already get that newsletter, you already tied in. If you don't get our newsletter, you can go to our michigan.gov/MDCR and actually sign up for our newsletter. That will be the mechanism that we use both to share those recommendations and then also the next steps, the opportunities to get involved so that we can move fair housing forward in Michigan. And with that being said, I am going to bring up our Executive Director, John E. Johnson, Jr., to close us out. Thank you.
John speaking. Thank you, Harold. Just a couple of minutes. I have a 5-minute speech here. Thanks, Vicki, but I'm not going to say that. I know you guys want to get out of here. So I want to, once again, let's give Harold a round of applause. And Patty and Liliana, they worked extremely hard at putting this together. Extremely hard. So we appreciated all that they've done. I hope you had an informative and productive day. Did you? Excellent. In addition to Harold and Patty and Liliana, he mentioned the staff of the agency. I'd like all the members of the staff of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights to stand and be recognized right now, please. These are your public servants. These are the ones who work every day for you to prevent and eliminate discrimination here in Michigan. That's our charge, and they do it in a very competent and professional manner each and every day on your behalf, and we should thank them. I thank them for all the hard work that they put into their job in servicing you, the residents of this state. Again, we've had an extraordinary conference in terms of what we've learned, AI and the real estate industry and service animals. That was an eye-opener in terms of what we learned about that. I'm sure all of you did not know all those rules and regulations surrounding assistance animals. That was certainly something that I think we all benefited from. I remember I'm chair of my trustee board at church, and I just started working here, and my pastor issued a declaration to everybody, no pets allowed, to which I said, whoa, hold up, hold up. Yeah, I might have gone along with that maybe 5-6 years ago, but I know better now. So again, an eye-opener and certainly something that we all needed to be aware of. Harold did not mention that everything has been taped. We will condense this and present this on our YouTube channel for all of you. For those of sessions that you did not get a chance to attend, you'll have a chance to review those through our YouTube channel later on. So we'll keep you advised of that. Hopefully we have your email address. We'll be able to let you know when that's available. As Harold said, this is not goodbye. This is see you later. This is not going to end here. The policy recommendations that have been submitted will be compiled, and we fully intend to take action to see that they're implemented, both in the public and private sectors. The best practices are not widespread. We want to make sure that everyone embraces those in the private sector and embraces the best practices to eliminate housing discrimination. Same thing on the public side. You heard Lisa Rice talk this morning about AI regulation, and we need to talk about that within our legislature, about AI and how we begin to regulate that very imposing sort of a barrier that we see to equal opportunity coming forth in this country. So we need to address that. So once we leave here, we'll compile that, we'll let you know. Our full intent is to get back together again with some task force in order to be able to implement these policy recommendations to make sure that, again, what we've done here is not for naught, is not in vain. We want to make sure we implement policy recommendations. That's what this is all about, policy reformation. And we intend to pursue that with your help. So look forward to that information. Again, we hope you've had an informative day. And as a reward, we have a reception for you planned immediately after this with some adult beverages. We want you to be sparse, though, in consuming those, but we have everything laid out for you. Hope you enjoy that opportunity for you to relax, network, and then talk among ourselves about what we do next. Again, glad you came out. Hope you had a good time. Again, informational. And again, we will see you again. Thank you.